Hello and welcome to Urban Herders and Urban Herding. In today's webinar, we're going to introduce you to the world of urban herding and sort of discuss how you can use it with your urban herders and how it can sort of enrich their lives and give them an outlet for something that they've obviously been bred for. We're going to have a little look into what urban herders are and what urban herding is and how it works and how to get started with it, essentially. So let's get going. Just thought I'd do a quick run through and introduce myself and introduce sort of the plan for today. We're gonna have a little look at what herding is. So if you do want to do urban herding, it's really important that you actually understand how collies or herding breeds herd. This is obviously aimed specifically at collies. Other herding breeds do herd slightly differently. But it's important you understand the premise of herding. It's more than just controlling movement or moving sheep. It's all about pressure and balance. And this is a reoccurring theme that goes through a lot of collies' lives, and they feel pressure in lots of different situations that you may not even recognize that that's what is happening. So it's really important that we can start to identify this as a theme within their life, and it makes life a little bit easier for them. And then we're going to go into how to get started with the training. The whole reason that I do what I do and train the way I train and do this is because of that dog right there. That is Jasper. He was a tri-prick-eared border collie that I inherited when I went on holiday one year. And he really struggled. He was the ultimate urban herder. He had really strong herding instincts, but he really struggled with urban life. He struggled with people. He struggled with dogs. He was like Chicken Little. The sky was falling. The ultimate pessimist. The world was ending. He really struggled. And I kind of travelled the length and breadth of the country. Went to Scotland. Went down to Gloucester. Went across like everywhere I could possibly think to try and find trainers to support me and help me with him, because he was like no dog I'd ever kind of had. And I found a lot of trainers don't really. Some trainers, not a lot. Some trainers can struggle with collies because they are quirky, to say the least. And I found some really useful stuff and some really stuff that just didn't quite work for us in our situation, but doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't work for other dogs. And I kind of we did a full year of rehabbing, and we got to the point where he could live a pretty normal life. We'd entered our first Heelwits music training show, and a massive part of his rehabilitation and becoming more of a normal dog was introducing him to this game and giving him an outlet and kind of seeing all his genetics and him really come alive when we played the game. Unfortunately, we lost him at a young age to epilepsy, really sadly. So he didn't make it, I suppose. But he did, while he was with us, get to a point where he was happy. He was happy. And this game was a big part of that. And we got to the point where we could take him to the local park. And I don't know if you can see in the back of the video, there is, in the back of that photo, there is like cars and vans. Now, before, he would have, upon sight of cars and vans, because he was a car chaser, as well as dog reactive and people reactive and things, he would chase across fields to get to them. And we got to the point where we could safely have him off lead in the park space like that with cars in the background like so, and he would completely ignore them and engage with the game. And it became a crucial part of our rehabbing plan, was to get him out into the world, but give him a job in that world. So we would take him to parks, do a little bit of this. We'd then do a little bit of processing work where we'd just sit and watch the world go by, and he'd process what was going on and watch people and watch dogs and watch cars. And we would reward the calm and reward the engagement, and then we'd go back and finish a little bit of urban herding. And it was the kind of the massive leap in our training that really helped us. So enough about me and Jasper. To start to understand collies as a whole, or to understand the job that we are trying to hopefully create for them, we have to understand the worker themselves and understand how they work, or how they traditionally would work. Now, farming changed quite drastically in the UK in about 1773 when the Enclosures Act came in. There was obviously the sort of more of the industrial revolution as well within farming, where we started to get really big machinery and other stuff, but mainly in terms of for the history of collies more so is the Enclosures Act. And what that basically did was it allowed wealthy landowners to put fences up and protect their land and claim their land and stop peasants and lower people using their land. And what happened was, rather than having big open expanses of moorland, we created fields and smaller sort of spaces. And what we needed were dogs that could go out and gather and bring the animals down into the crofts, into the farms, to have whatever treatment or work needed doing to then go back out into the open space. Now, so this kind of started to shape the collies as we know them. Now, England is very varied in its landscape. I live off the back of the Pennines, so it's very steep valleys. It's quite high where I live. The ground is of a poorer quality than certain areas. The land I have my sheep on isn't particularly good quality land, but I have hill breeds, so they kind of thrive in those little environments. And the types of dogs that I need are very different than a dog who would live and work on, say, open fell land, or who may work and do lots of yard work. So within herding itself, there are different types of herding or different attributes that would make them more successful to different types of jobs or to different environments. And if you have a farm that is quite varied in its terrain, you may find you have different dogs for different type of work itself as well. And the sheep are a reflection on the environment that they live in. So you generally have them split into two types of sheep. You have your hill sheep or your fell sheep, and your lowland sheep. So your fell sheep or your hill sheep are generally lighter, flightier. They're more likely to run, and they tend to be kind of leaner. They tend to be really good mothers, but they only produce singles, so they're not as what's the word? Productive in terms of commercially. However, they're a lot hardier and kind of have a little bit more grit. However, your lowland sheep tend to be heavier, stockier, and they're described as your fight sheep. So they're much more likely to tire easier and turn on a dog and go, actually, I don't want to do that. And they tend to have multiples, but they can be poorer mothers. So they're not as good in terms of looking after themselves, because we have selectively bred them to be heavier stocked. So they're more commercially viable. And you need different types of dogs to deal with different types of sheep. And certain dogs are a good working dog can kind of turn its hand to anything, but certain dogs or certain lines of dogs will have attributes which are more suitable to certain types of work or certain types of sheep and things along those lines. So Old Hemp has been cited as being the term, like the original sire of the breed, and he's described as being the Northumberland type. And what's really nice is actually you can see many collies today that have very similar sort of structure and look, maybe slightly different markings, but similar sort of structure and look to him. He was bred by a gentleman called Adam Telfer in Northumberland. And what Adam found at the time was he had a collection of good work dogs, but they were kind of seen as being really hard-headed, really tough dogs, difficult to train, rough on the sheep, and just not kind of what they were really looking for. And what he did was he created Old Hemp by breeding these really hard but really strong, powerful work dogs to softer, milder mannered, more biddable bitches. And what he produced was Old Hemp, who was said to be kind of ambling after sheep at a really young, like sort of weeks old. And what made him really unique was his style of working, the way he worked in a silent manner and his manner with the sheep. Now, the ISDS, which is the International Sheepdog Society, wasn't founded until 1995, not 1995, 1905, pardon me. And Old Hemp is, I think he's either 6th or 10th in the ISDS stud book, so he was added retrospectively. But that's kind of when there was the first kind of recognition of sheepdogs, or border collies as we call them. Now, every dog is, or every sheepdog, every border collie is a sheepdog, but not every sheepdog is a border collie. For a border collie to be a border collie, theoretically, it should be registered with the ISDS or the Kennel Club. Now, it doesn't really matter. It's just a piece of paper. However, it does mean you can kind of look at the lineage and figure out where your dog has come from. In around 1950s, was when they were recognised 1980s was when they were recognised by the Kennel Club. And this is when the breed kind of changed a little bit because they actually had a breed standard. So up until this point, they were bred for function. Didn't necessarily matter how they looked, whether they were male, red, black, lots of white, not a lot of white, prick-eared, flat-eared, short-coat, long-coated, medium-coated. What mattered is how they functioned, so how they worked. However, when the Kennel Club created a breed standard, it set out certain criteria that the dogs had to fit to be able to be classed as a border collie, and that is where there's the big differentiation there, is that there actual is a breed standard for the Kennel Club, whereas for the ISDS there isn't. So when it comes down to herding, it's really important that we understand what the dog's aim is with herding. Now, herding is not just chasing about sheep. What it is actually about is the control and manipulation of stock in the aim to aid the shepherd. So a lot of the time, even with young dogs, when you see them kind of starting around with sheep, what they're actually trying to do is control the movement. Now, a lot of young dogs, they're very fast and erratic and they don't quite understand what they're trying to do. And you can see, especially if you've ever seen a young dog that may have accidentally got in with sheep or something, they'll kind of pin them into a corner and hold them there, because what they've done is they've controlled that movement. The movement has stopped, and that is their happy place. You can see this quite a lot in dogs that do a lot of ball play repetitively, where the owner will pick up the ball, essentially the sheep, throw it out of control movement. The collie will go out, gather it, bring it back and drop it and stare at it. And that ball is under control, the movement is under control. And that part of the sequence, that little bit there, is the bit when our herders are the most content, because the movement is under control. They'll generally put it between the shepherd, the owner, and themselves. The ball is balanced, movement is controlled, they are happy. And then owners will pick it up and fling it again, which creates more out of control movement, which for a lot of herders can create a lot of frustration. You then double that in with a lot of dopamine and adrenaline and all the good hormones, and you can start to quite quickly create like an addictive game for these dogs. And this is where you can get these ball addicted herders, where nothing comes above the ball. So when we're looking at this from a herding perspective, what our collies do is they use the use of predatory eye behavior, so that collie staring that you will all be familiar with, and movement such as flanking, so left and right circular kind of responses, to evoke the flocking response in sheep prey, which is the prey unit. Now, this is going off the predator-prey relationship between these. So what happens is the whole aim of this is for the predator, the herding breed dog, to evoke enough of the anti-predator avoidance strategy within the prey, the sheep, to elicit that flocking response. So in regards to sheep as prey species, there's a number of strategies they do to keep themselves safe from the predator. First is they'll pick up their eyes and look at whatever's potential danger has entered their home or their environment. Then if that threat is escalated, so if the dog starts to move or they feel that eye behavior, it escalates the threat level. And what the prey will do is they should flock together. So it's safety in numbers. They move as one unit. Then if the threat level is escalated further, so rather than herding, the dog is actually chasing, what the prey will do is move to a flee response. Now, when the sheep generally get into that flee response, it's hard to control them to an extent. So herding is all about putting enough pressure on the prey, the sheep, to evoke the flocking response without putting too much pressure on them to push them into that flee zone where it is kind of panic stations and just run everywhere. So, and there's definition of herding is the act of bringing individual animals together in a group, maintaining the group and moving the group from place to place or any combination of those. And that group aspect, that flocking aspect, is the main thing that you're looking for with that. So when we're looking at the herding, it's all about the predatory sequence. So traditionally, the predatory sequence is eye, orientate, stalk, chase, grab, bite, kill, bite, consume. Now, the kill, bite, and consume has been selectively bred out of these dogs, because if you've got a dog that is going out and killing your sheep and then eating them, you're not going to have a particularly successful farm, and that dog would not be around for very long, whether it is sold on or killed traditionally. If you have a dog that is displaying those types of genetics and those types of behaviors, they would not be used for work, and those genetics would not be passed on any further. With the eye, you will all know what I mean by this. It's that really intense eye contact where they'll stare at stuff, and it kind of sometimes feel like they're staring through you a little bit. The stalk is the use of that predatory eye behavior with slow and controlled forward movement. So slow and controlled is the key component of that. It's not a big rush in. It should be just adding that tiny bit extra pressure to evoke movement, or to add extra pressure to get a response from them. Flanking / chase, because collies don't necessarily have a true chase behavior. If you watch them, you can see it quite a lot when they play. A lot of the times when they're playing with other dogs, they don't have a true chase, where like if you watch something like a whippet or something play, they will chase prop play where the dog is behind the other dog, and it should kind of be interchanging roles and things like that, but it chases behind. However, for a lot of collies, you can end up with the collie kind of hanging off the shoulder of the other dog, and it's almost like they're trying to head them off, which they are essentially, and that is flanking them. So it's heading off that movement again, and it comes back into that control and management of the movement is what they're trying to achieve. And then there is a grab bite in red. Now, grab bite is also known as pulling wool, because if they've grabbed, especially on the bum, they'll end up with a mouth of wool. Hence why it's called pulling wool. Now, it's in red because if you do it in a trialing world, it's seen as a fault and you'll be disqualified. However, a dog with a grab bite, it is still in the sequence for most dogs, and having that in there is a really useful tool for some situations, especially if you're dealing with really grumpy ewes or rams or really heavy sheep that are turning on the dog. Having that extra bit of presence and pressure to be able to put onto the sheep can be a really useful tool. However, we don't want to overuse it, and it should only be kind of popping out when you've got eyes on eyes. So when the sheep has turned onto the dog, you shouldn't really be getting them nipping at bums and things like that. So why can collies struggle in an urban environment? It kind of comes back to what we've selectively bred them for. So this is a dog that has been bred for function traditionally. So it's been bred solely with a job in mind. It's been bred to be stimulated and responsive to movement. So like I say, if there is movement in the environment, it stimulates the dog. And a lot of the time, they've been bred to not only be stimulated by it, they've been responsive to it. They have to respond to the movement in the environment. They have very acute hearing, so they can be quite sound sensitive, and they can find loud or lots of noise and things like that a little bit overwhelming for them. A lot of these dogs have incredibly tailored breeding lineage, in terms of we have selectively bred these dogs to perform one specific task, which is herding. Now, we're then taking them out of their very niche environment where they are literally designed to be perfect for, and putting them in an environment which is complete polar opposite for them, where there is a lot of movement, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of stuff going on, and if we don't put a lot of time and work and effort into doing lots of sociability and lots of habituation and getting them used to just general life, especially from a really, really young age, they can start to struggle. Sociability is got a question mark next to it, because you can get some collies that are like super social. However, more often than not, without intensive socialization or effort on your behalf, they can start to become kind of socially tolerant or more intolerant, depending on the dog. Because a lot of the time, these are dogs that have been bred without sociability in mind. Whereas if you compare them to, say, for example, your gun dogs, where within their job, traditionally, they have to go out onto shoots where there are lots of strange people, lots of strange dogs, carry out their job role traditionally, or in some cases, they would be kept in the house as part of the family pet. Whereas collies don't have that as a presence on their breeding criteria. A lot of collies are kept outside. They're yard dogs, so they're not kept in the home, so that element of sociability isn't necessarily needed. They're generally kind of worked by one person or one family. You don't generally get a lot of people coming in, or strange people coming and going from farms. If they do, they probably potentially traditionally wouldn't have much to do with the collies because they're working dogs. They're a tool essentially. And a lot of the times they don't have to deal with a lot of strange or unknown dogs because, again, you don't have lots of strange or unknown dogs coming and going from farms. You'd have the farm dogs that reside there, but you wouldn't necessarily have loads of dogs coming and going. So sociability hasn't always been a massive factor with these dogs. You also have the fact that traditionally it's very black and white for these dogs of they sleep in a kennel or a barn or a stable and they go out to work. Now, this kennel, barn, or stable are generally relatively barren environments. There's not a lot of stimulation there. Then you go out and you have high stimulation of being on the yard, doing the job, going out on the quad, going out into the fields. They then go back into this very low stimulation environment and it's very black and white. However, in the home, especially if they've been reared in these like lower stimulation environments, you bring them into the home and there's a lot of stimulation all the time, just constantly there in the background, which we wouldn't even necessarily notice. Things like washing machines, TVs, radios, little bits like that, which for a dog who has potentially had not a lot in its dog's life is a lot of stimulation anyway. You also have the fact that if they have been reared outside rather than inside, that people coming in are a source of excitement because it means they're going to be fed or handled. They don't get used to just having people about and it becoming part of their everyday. So then having people about becomes a stimulation. You can get collies that can really start to struggle to switch off around stuff because they've not learned how to do it in an environment where there's stuff going on from a young age. And without putting time and effort in, it can become a bigger issue. We've also bred them to have a really strong work ethic and want to work and enjoy the work. So a lot of the time when you start working with young collies, you don't need to use toys and food. The opportunity to do the job itself is reward enough. The opportunity to go through the sequence of behaviours to do the behaviours itself is rewarding enough. And this is the same for a lot of herding breeds. And this is where a lot of them can start to get into bother, where if they are not getting the right types of stimulation at the right times or enough stimulation, quote unquote, or they don't have an off switch, so they're constantly looking for stimulation, they can start to become self-employed and it can start to pop out in really weird places. And also you have to think of these genetics almost like a switch, and certain things will trigger that switch to switch on. And you can see bits of like predatory drift, which is where these predatory behaviors will start to pop out, especially when there's lots of movement going on. So you can generally see a lot of predatory herding behaviors pop out in herding breeds through play, especially if they're playing with like really fast moving dogs, which can make them not that fun to play with because then you have one person in your game that's just trying to control every movement you do, which as the other player, he's not the funnest thing to kind of endure. So one of the things to do with this work ethic is to do with a little bit of their brain called the ascending reticulum activating system, also known as the ARIS. And this is described as the seat of awareness. And it's the small bit of the brainstem that goes down into the central hemispheres and down towards the spinal cord. And what it is this is basically our sensory input device. So at any one point, if you start to look around the room that you're in, you'll start to notice all the little bits. So for example, I'm currently in my kitchen. I've noticed my hob, I've noticed my microwave, I've noticed the coffee machine, I've noticed my plant. These are all stuff that I was subconsciously filtering out because I'm speaking to you guys on this Zoom. However, when I actually start to actively look up and look around, my brain will then start to input them and I'll actively notice them. Now, because we are constantly getting so much sensory input all the time, if we were processing every single bit of data, every noise, every sight, every sound, every smell, everything in all at once, we would be literally paralyzed with the input of data. So what this does is this filters out all the things that our brain deems unnecessary at that moment in time to help you with whatever you're trying to achieve in the moment. And this is one of the things that our collies can do really, really, really damn well. They can zone in and get so focused on the job that they start to ignore other stuff. Now, this makes them fantastic work dogs. However, this can make them start to really struggle in an urban environment when they're zoning in on stuff that we don't want them to, and they're zoning us out. And when they're doing this, it's not a case of them being disobedient or rude or naughty. It is the fact that their brain is literally filtering you out. They can't hear or have that input from you because their brain is literally going, you don't exist, you don't exist. We need to herd this car. We need to chase that child. We need to chase that bike. And what happens is it starts to filter out the different senses. So sight, sound, touch, all those different stuff except smell, because that's a slightly different part of the brain. And this is why our dogs can stop taking food or responding to known cues. So you could have the most obedient dog in the world, but once they get zoned in into this work mode, which is due to this part of the brain, they stop responding to stuff, or they stop taking food, or they might snatch it from you, but it's kind of almost like a second thought after focusing on what they're trying to focus on. So how can this help our urban collies? With herding and their genetic need to herd or to control movement, it's kind of like trying to control steam, trap steam. Eventually, that pressure will build and that it will find its way out. Our dogs will find a way to give themselves their own jobs if we don't find them. Now, some of these can be quite harmless, depending on your dog and what they're doing. So, for example, I have 3 collies and each of my collies herds one another. Now, it is pretty harmless in the way that they do it. Aoife, my Merle, is pretty clueless and she is not bothered in the slightest that my other 2 herd her, and they just herd each other in tandem. However, when they're around my mum's little terrier and they start herding her, it really starts to bother her. So in that situation, we would stop it because it obviously is having a negative impact on our little terrier. However, with Aoife, because she is kind of not noticing what's happening, I kind of don't mind them doing it in that instance. So it's really important that if our dogs are finding these opportunities to herd and have an outlet for this behaviour, then we decide whether it is appropriate or not appropriate in this environment. And you may find that they're doing it in games like which you're playing with them. So things like frisbee and things like that. That's fine if you're happy with that and you've deemed it appropriate. However, it can start to pop out in places that aren't appropriate. So urban herding can create an outlet for your dog. It can create a natural outlet for your dog in their innate needs and the opportunity to herd, but in a constructive and controlled way. It also teaches our dogs to listen in states of herding. So a lot of owners lose their dogs to herding, where they'll start to herd and then the dog switches off to the owner. So what we can start to do is teach them to listen and learn while they're in these states of arousal and herding. It also provides mental and also physical stimulation. So urban herding works both their brain and their body. So not only are we physically tiring them out because they're running around and working, but we're also mentally tiring them out too. And like I said earlier, you can use it in rehabilitation plans where you're utilising these skills, but you're kind of, especially with dogs that struggle to process their environment, you can put them into these environments, but you're giving them a job to focus on that is small and little, that they can just look at that little bit of the job rather than the whole big wide world. So herding is all about pressure and release, and I started to mention this a little bit earlier, and this is true for all herding breeds. With herding, you have pressure and release, and when you're working with it, you want to, like I said earlier, evoke enough pressure onto the prey species to evoke that flocking response where the animals will move as one. However, you don't want to put too much pressure on them so that they start to flee. And this is the same with our collies. So you have to imagine herding as like 3 bubbles. The shepherd, the dog, and the sheep all have pressure. And when you start first working, as the shepherd moves away, the sheep will move into that space the shepherd has just released, and the dog will move on to those sheep. If the shepherd moves round, the sheep will move round and the dog will move round. It's all about that pull and push of pressure. So when we're looking at this from an urban herding perspective, the pressure is the person with the ball and making them do all the different behaviours that we're looking for from them. When they do the right behaviors, we give them a little bit of a release. We allow them to control that movement by kicking the ball to them and allowing them to catch. Now, depending on your dog, will depend on how they then respond to this. You may find that they parade the ball. They may have it in their mouth and they'll kind of go all big and postural, big tail up and go all poofy. You may find that some dogs will spit the ball straight away and go straight back to work. Some dogs won't even grip the ball in their mouth. They'll kind of bounce in the way of the ball and then carry on working. All of these are correct. There's no kind of right or wrong with this. If you have a dog that likes to parade with the ball, I allow them to relish in that, especially if you're working with younger dogs. So dogs that are kind of back end of puppies to adolescent-ish, you may find that they need that as a bit of a release for them as well. So I allow them to have that parade. When we're coming to herding, it's about balance. And this is kind of a bit of a weird concept to try and explain, but you generally want to think of it like clock face. So on this clock face, as you can see here, you have the shepherd at 9, the dog at 3, and the sheep in the center. And this is where everything is happy. The sheep are balanced to the shepherd, the sheep are under control, they're not going anywhere. Now, if the shepherd moves his positioning up to 12, the dog is now at 3, and this leaves the sheep unbalanced. So to get the sheep back balanced, the dog needs to mimic that movement and go opposite to where the shepherd is. And this rebalances the sheep. The sheep are happy, they're under control, and there's nowhere to go. Now, if the dog had stayed at 3, like so, what would happen is there's a massive void here on this left-hand side where there's a massive gap, and what that is going to do is it creates a no pressure zone, and the sheep are going to move into that space and therefore move out of control. So they're not in where we want to work with them. And this is the premise we're going to look at when we're looking at this, is keeping the dog or the ball in this balance point so that the dog's happy, shepherd's happy, we're all good. So when we're looking at urban herding, I personally generally will use traditional working cues. With my dogs, I do work them on sheep as well, and I've found doing a lot of this along with the predatory play has been really beneficial. So come by is a clockwise flank, pardon me. So C, come by, clockwise. Away is an anti-clockwise flank, A, away, anti. Lie down or freeze is a stop. And it's a stop, not a lie down. So depending on how technical you want to get with your training, if you want your downs to mean down, you may want to use freeze as your cue. Now, I use lie down because I use it as a traditional cue, but lie down just means stop. Walk up means walk on to the prey. Look back means turn around, you've missed a sheep. You generally use this if you've sent your dog on an outrun, which is where you first walk into the field and you need to gather your sheep. You'll send the dog right round the edge of the field and they will gather the sheep up and then bring them to you. However, sometimes they may miss a sheep, or they may cut in a little bit earlier and miss a little area of sheep, and you'd say look back, which means turn around, you've missed some. Here means come to my side. That'll do is recall, so it's come away, that'll do. And ready means ready to catch the ball, and this is specific for this game. So the equipment you're going to need is large soft balls. Personally, I really like the extra large Holy Rollers, the 18cm ones. They're the best, I find. Some of the balls I still have now are the ones that I used to play with Jasper. Because they're really robust, they last ages, the dogs can grip them, they're quite, you can play with them in any weather. If it's wet, they don't get soggy. If it's hot, the dog can pant through them. You can kind of squish them, compact them down into like backpacks and stuff like that. They're really good. You can also use the IKEA balls. They're a much more cost-effective way to do this. However, if you have a dog that likes to shred, I wouldn't recommend them, and they can get quite heavy and hard to kind of handle, especially in winter, when it is wet and muddy and horrible like it is at the moment. Cones are really useful, and we'll look at that a little bit later. Frisbees can be great for creating a dog that, if they play a little bit tight. A large clear area to play in. You don't want to play in an area too small, because what we want to do is use the space and our movements and our body language to influence how our dogs move. Now, if you play in an area that's too small, you might end up your dog playing really tight because they feel pressure from the environment, i.e. physical things in the environment and they're not able to move how they would naturally. If you wanted to level it up, you could also look at tug toys and flirt poles and get a little bit more technical with some of this. So the first thing we're going to have a little look at is teaching our dogs to catch the ball. So this is where they stop the movement.
The ball to where it drops.
So you start by dropping the ball between your legs. I generally have all of the balls in my hand and drop them out one at once. As I notice my dog locking onto the ball that I'm playing with, you generally want them to start to look in a little bit more of a predatory stance, so lowering of their head, that tail tucking under rather than being over their backs. Second, I notice them engaging with the ball I've just dropped, I will kick the ball to them for them to stop the movement. You'll notice with this game, with Piper, she doesn't grab the ball, she kind of just gets in the way of the ball, she kind of bounces in the way and then bounces out. Anytime they offer behaviors like that, which is a nice natural flank movement, I'll mirror it, so I just follow the dog round. And you can see here, she's very close, like intent on the ball I'm working with. She kind of bounces in the way, there you go, and then gets on with the game. At this point, I'm balancing to the dog. So whenever I drop the ball, I'm making sure my head, shoulders, knees, and toes are pointing at my dog, because that's where my balance point is. If you've got your feet facing one direction and your shoulders facing another, your dog will be off balance, or your balance point is a really awkward thing for your dog to read. So we almost want to be a little bit robotic kind of with it and making sure that we're really obvious with where we want our dog to be in regards to our balance point. Like I said earlier, some dogs, unlike Pipes, will pick up the ball and parade around with it. If they do, let them do it. You may find that they start to do really nice natural like flank moving, which is flanks where the dog moves in a circular motion left or right, and this influences the movement of the sheep. So once we've started to teach our dogs to stop the movement, catch the ball, what we then want the dog to be able to do is move between the balls that we're working with and move from the ball that they're working with, or they've just caught, onto the ball that we want them to work with. So
we're now going to work on this ball, not that ball. So it's building on our dog's ability to switch off from whichever ball we've just been working with onto the ball we're currently working with. So as soon as we've kicked that ball to them, that ball is out of play for that moment in time, and we move on to the next sheep, so the next ball. Whichever ball is between our feet is the ball that we're playing with, and our dog needs to learn that this is a team, this is a partnership effort. So whichever ball I'm working on, they need to be working on also.
So once you've got all your balls out in play, so you've played the catch game, I will then start to keep all the balls on the ground and move between each ball. So as I approach one ball, I want her looking at the ball I'm with, and you can see she's obviously working the ball I'm on there. Second she's with it, I'll square to her and kick the ball to her. What I'm looking for is the dog to focus on the ball I'm working on rather than the ball that's just been kicked. And this is where you can start to struggle a little bit with the dogs who can parade quite a lot and want to keep the ball. If you find you have a dog like this, what you want to do is just kick the ball between your own feet and see if they'll start to engage with the ball that you have at your feet. Sorry for backing then. And onto the ball that you have. If you find that they're struggling with this, then you can use a drop or a leave command if you have one. And you can see there, whenever I go to a different ball, she's working that ball I have. And at this point, I'm balancing her. So I'm moving to her and making sure I'm square with her. Oh. So once we start to have this, what I'm then going to start to do is teach my dog to find the balance point. So up until this point, I've been balancing to the dog. I've been making sure I'm squaring myself to the dog. Once my dog has an understanding to play with the ball I'm playing with and to stop the movement, I can then start to play around with their balance point, and this is where we can start to build what is the beginning of a flank.
So we're going to teach our dogs to take the ball for a walk, and this is all about, rather than us squaring ourselves and balancing ourselves to the dog, this is now starting to change that balance point just very slightly, and what we're hoping to is start to create some stalking and some flanking behaviours to start to build those behaviours that we eventually want to see from our dogs. So what we're going to do is we start with the ball. We can start with either balancing them or not balancing them, and we just start to take the ball in linear walks straight forward, with the hope that the dog will start to realise that the balance point isn't there, he hasn't got that contact and that pressure to the ball anymore, and start to move themselves to reassert that pressure. So once we've finally kicked our last ball, we move on to the next ball, and we're going to start to dribble it. Remember, we're dribbling as in penguin on ice, ball between our feet rather than bend it like Beckham. Nice, slow, considered movements. We want to try and move in more linear sort of straight lines rather than round circles. Once the dog gets onto the line, like Benny did there, all I do is drag the ball back to a more suitable distance because he was a bit close, and kick him to have that release. Benny is quite young and he plays around quite a lot, and this is totally fine. I just move on to the next ball and start playing and wait for him to re-engage. As you can see here, he stays alongside me for quite a while. This is totally normal. I just keep moving slowly forwards with it until he starts to get himself onto the right line. If he starts to jump in and try and grab the ball from my feet, I just stand and kill it. What I want to do is just keep playing until he finds that balance point. I don't want to square myself onto him without him doing it properly. If he gets himself into that 10 or 2 zone, I will kind of square onto him because he's almost right, and I don't want to set him up for failure. There you go. But I also don't want to accept like rubbish versions of the behaviour. So you could see he squared himself onto me there, and I kicked and released it. He's going to have a little wild goon with the ball here, and I just calmly and quietly get on with my game. I don't ask him to stop, because that's his enjoyment. That's where he gets the reward from. If I try and cut that too short, he's going to stop enjoying the game. My knees and my feet are facing here. That's where the dog should be. The dog is there, he's in the wrong position, and you want to keep moving in a linear position or linear motion rather than round the dog. So I just keep moving forward and backwards. If he tries to steal the ball, I step on it, wait for him to back up a bit, which he does, pop it up, pull it back to the right kind of distance for us to play, and kick it to him. Good boy. And then I move on to the next ball. Benny is only 9 months, so he's quite juvenile. He generally plays with the ball quite a lot. So again, I'm going to point my feet in that direction, so he should be on that line. Remember, I do allow the 10 to 2 as a little bit of leeway, but he has to swing himself round to balance that ball before he gets it. And it's him that's balancing the ball when I'm doing taking the ball for a walk, rather than me balancing to him.
So you can see here, as I set off, he kind of stays off the back of me and he rushes forward to the ball in front. He quite quickly drops it and re-engages with my ball, and that is why I kick that ball to him. It kind of puts him in the right position inadvertently, but because he is in the right position, I will always reward him for that. Again, we start to do some nice movement, and you can see he's starting to swing himself round. He's in kind of a 10 o'clock zone there. He's not 100% on the 12, so I do draw it back to reward him, but he keeps coming in too close. He's stalking too far. So what I do is I just cue it down, ask him into the down position, and drag the ball back. We will teach our dogs a lie down behaviour, and that's what we're going to do. But if we find that the dog is coming in too tight when we're trying to pull the ball back, all I will do is cue that down behaviour while I pull the ball back, so he's getting rewarded in the right area. I don't want to start rewarding him too tight and too close and making the game become really close in. Benny is quite young when we recorded this, and throughout the game he does kind of get a little bit distracted. He might have a sniff or eat some sheep poo from the sheep that have been in the field recently, and that's okay. I will just keep saying, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And it generally gets him re-engaged with the ball and with the game, so we can start getting the game going quite well. If I find that he's disengaging quite frequently like that, I'll just lower the criteria and make it a little bit easier for him, because it just means I might have made it a little bit too hard, a little bit quickly for him, and I don't want to ruin the fun of the game. I just want it to be something fun and enjoyable for him. There you go. So you can sometimes see when he gets a little bit frustrated, he rushes to the other balls that are out in the field. I just ignore him, and you find that he eventually does kind of re-engage with the ball that I have. Here, he's getting a little bit sticky. He's not where I want him to be, so I do a few fake kicks to see if I can get him moving, and because he doesn't go, I say, too bad, which is my non-reward marker, saying, you're not where you're meant to be, and I kick the ball to where he should have been. I don't want to do this too many times because it means that he's consistently getting it wrong, but I do give him chance. I will repeatedly do a few kicks. If he doesn't quite get it, I will then kick it to where he should have been, so he has to chase the ball, but it's a chase of an out of control ball, which if you remember, collies like everything under control. It makes them, it's not as rewarding for them as just kicking the ball to them and them getting to control that actual movement.
So once we've started to create a dog that is understanding that if we aren't squaring to them, they have to square to us, we can then develop that into a more fully rounded flank. So the way that we start to look about this is we can start to, there's a couple of kind of different methods depending on what your dog is doing. Now, some dogs will be really, really natural and they'll move really, really easily, and they'll just, and Pipe is one of them dogs, and you'll see in this video. However, she can have a habit of playing quite tight, which creates its own different issue. However, you can get some dogs that are really, really sticky, and you have to really break it down into like quarter turn, and do a few fit kicks and things like that, which we'll look at in a second, to get them moving. But each kind of dog plays in their own way, and that is absolutely fine. There isn't kind of one way it should look necessarily.
So the next behaviour you're going to look at is teaching this flanking behaviour. So if you remember the first video that you went through, which is about the game, where we taught you about balancing, this is where we're going to start to see if we can build that into the game. What we're going to do is, once our dog is on the ball that we're working with, we're going to take a quarter turn and keep the dog off our shoulder so we can see them out our peripheral vision. And what our dog should hopefully do is move round to balances, aka move so that they're in the position between the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock on the clock face, so that they're learning to balance the ball and move as we move. So we can start to build a little bit of this lovely flanking behaviour.
So you can start to see here, I move the ball around a little bit. As my dog moves into the hot zone, which normally we want them at that 12 o'clock, but I allow when we first start with this between the 10 and the 2, and that becomes the hot zone. So whenever they get themselves into that, especially if you've got a dog that can be really sticky, that hot zone is really important. However, if you've got a dog that will move quite easily and freely like this, I will be a little bit more specific and get them dead on that 12. As soon as she moves into that hot zone and she stops moving, I kick the ball to them. I try not to kick the ball as the dog is still moving, because you can create a chase behavior, which we don't want. If you move the ball and the dog stays where they are, and you can do a couple of fake kicks to get them moving, but if they don't move, what happens is you will kick the ball to where they should have been. So if you remember on the diagram with the shepherd at the top and the dog out there, if you were trying to get them to that 6 o'clock position on the ball, you do a couple of fake kicks like that, and you can see that fake kick got her to the right position there. However, if she didn't, I generally do 2 kick fix, and I'll fake kicks, and as I do, I'll use my ready cue. I'll go ready, and if they're not there when I need them to be, what I will do is kick the ball to where they should have been. So you'll see this with here. So 1 fake kick, 2 fake kicks. She wasn't where she's meant to be, so the ball got kicked to where she should have been, rather than where she was. And this creates that chase behavior, and inherently collies don't like to chase. They like to control the movement instead. And you can see here Piper does tend to play a little bit tighter. However, she does move relatively freely, which is nice. So once we start to get that, and if you have a dog that plays quite tight like Piper, what we can start to do is teach our dogs using cones or uprights to stay out a little bit further. So you can see here that we're doing this with this guy. So what we've done is we've put his mum in the circle of cones, and the expectation is that he stays on the outside. If your dog is really struggling with this, what you would teach is them to begin with, you'd break it right down and teach them to go around 1 cone, then 2 cones, and slowly until they can do the full sort of circle. But what we're looking at is to kind of build him out, and to begin with this circle, because you can see his natural position is that distance. That's how far he naturally wants to be from this. So kicking him out to this distance is quite an increase for him. And you just slowly build it out, and you can see there he's cut the corner. So what we do is we'd walk into him, and what this does is put pressure on him to move out of the circle. Once he's out of the circle, you then go back to being square to him before moving. With this as well, you want to be mindful of how quickly you move. If you move too quickly, you'll encourage them in, which is what she did there. But as she slows down, you can see he gets into a much better kind of movement and sequence there. As he's square to her, which he was there, you can see her just hold that pressure just for a second with him stopping and stalking the ball, just there, really lovely, before releasing and kicking him and giving him that release and that, well done, you've got it. Again, we get him moving. It's important to make the dogs move in both directions, and a lot of the time dogs that move quite naturally like this can play quite tight. It's kind of a common theme, not necessarily always, but it's really important that before we kick the ball, we do get that stop behaviour, just to make sure we're not inadvertently rewarding any chase or in building any chase into the game. Like so. Now, you can see here with him, he has a habit of kind of, once he's gone round, he can sneak in a little bit, which I'll show you how we can kind of look and we can break it down. Now, what she did there, you want to avoid. So when you're working with these dogs, it's really important that we always do it kind of movement, stop, movement, stop, movement, stop. What we don't want to do is have quick changes, because what that did was made him flick in and brought him in tighter. So whenever we want to change direction or change behavior that we're asking for them, whether it is the flank, the left or right round, or the walk on, which we'll have a look at in a minute, you always want to make sure there is a stop in the middle so that the behaviors are clean and concise, and the training that we're doing is nice and clean. Again, we get that turn. This time, theoretically, she should stop before turning back the opposite direction. And you can see he got it right that time, because the game is slowed down and it's getting clear and an obvious message to him. And this is what's important, that we make sure that we're doing with our dogs, is that we're being as clear and obvious with what we're asking of them so that they can get it right. So once we've sort of looked at that, you can have dogs that can have a habit of sneaking in. So this is Flash, who is an absolute dream. And you can see here, we'll be using the cone because he had a habit of playing really tight. However, he has a habit of when he stops, he creeps in, and you can see he's sort of brought himself past the cones there.
I would give him that, because
and this is where
outside the
we want to we want to be a little bit pedantic with what we're doing. So for Flash, we were trying to build him out because he had a habit of playing right on top of his mum. So we used the cones to build it out, but then we started to notice that he had this habit of creeping in on his stop. So the way that we started to change that was we looked at trying to get him to push himself out, almost back out with his flanks, so that if he did come in, we could push him out with our left or right away come by cue. And the way we started to teach that was using two cones. We'd have him in the middle of them, around sort of either in line with them to begin with, and then eventually with the cone slightly behind him, so it's mimicking more of the natural pushing out and round. And we'd cue the behaviour, so the left or right, away come by. And we're using a flirt pole to reward this, just because it's a little bit easier in terms of reward placement, as to get the toy in the right position, ideally. Oh, so you can see here, she cued him and he cut across, and that's what he has a habit of doing on his cones.
Yes.
Is he cuts across them, and then he'll push himself out. And what we're trying to do is get more, it's called a square flank, which is where the dogs turns where they're from to get a better line. It's a slightly more technical way of doing it, and this is the way that we can start to train it. So we have the dog here, that's his fault, not fault, his mistake.
Yes.
We then prompt him to kick back round, and we can start to build this so that the dog, even if they do creep forward, if we cue them, they'll kick themselves back out. So we can start to unpick some of the bad habits that they may start to do. We can also look at teaching them another foundation skill, which is called teaching the dog to stalk, which is a slow and controlled forward movement.
So we're now going to take the ball ball for a walk, which means we're going to start doing really small movements with the ball to try and stimulate some different behaviours from our dogs. The first one I'm going to do is start by moving my foot backwards, so dragging the football with me in a backward motion to see whether my dog will creep forward. Or we can start to build this walk on or stalking type behaviour.
You can see here, the dog is on the balance point. I just slowly start to move the ball backwards. The second she gets up and moves forward and stops again, I will reward her by kicking the ball to her. If you have a dog that is just kind of running straight at you, if you lift your leg, you'll prompt them to stop in anticipation for the ball being kicked. Now, what she did here is she's moved too close, so she has almost attempted to steal the ball. What I've done here is stepped on it to kill the ball. Second she backs up, I should have dragged the ball back a little bit just to create a little bit more distance before kicking the ball to her. And this is something, if you do have a dog that has a habit of playing really tight, I wouldn't overtrain this at this point. I would kind of leave this to do later on, as this is something you'll probably pick up really easily. However, creating that distance and teaching the dog to work at a distance is a lot harder to do. Once we've started to get all these behaviours, we can then look at putting them on a cue.
We're now going to look at putting these behaviours on cue. I personally use traditional sheepdog cues, so my clockwise flanking is come by, my anti-clockwise is away, my stop is lie down. However, this doesn't have to be an actual down position. All I'm looking for is that stop, so they can do that in a sit, a down or a stand. And I also have my walk on, which is the creep forward. I will sometimes use Are You Ready to let our dogs know to pay attention a little bit more, and I have my fake kicks and things like that, but I don't put them on cue. We put them on cue the exact same way you would with any other behaviour. You say the new cue, so the word, and then we follow it after a second or two with the old cue, which is our movements that stimulate the behaviours.
So same way as you add any cue onto anything, we say the cue, we then give them a second, we then do the movement. And you can see here with Hazel, she understands what we're asking of her. And like certain things like the walk on.
At a point where they're really predictable, and every time I ask for them or prompt them, my dog does them, that's when I start to add the cue. So just before, for example, with the lie down, just before I stop moving, I will say the cue. So I'm predicting when they're going to stop, and I start to add in that word that means lie down. It could be freeze, it could be stop, it could be anything. With my actual turning cues and my flanking cues, I will say the word, wait a second, and then do the behaviour. So I'm hopefully starting to transition the cues from just a physical cue, so me moving around the ball, onto that fully verbal cue.
You can see here, I'm trying my best now to say the cue, get her to move first, and then I follow her as a reward to say, yeah, that's the right behaviour. There I cued her and away, and she got it wrong. All I did was cued her to lie down to stop her from doing the wrong thing, and re-cued the right behaviour with a little bit more of a prompt so she didn't get it wrong, essentially. And what I'm trying to do is now put it so that I say the cue, she does the behavior, then I just mimic her. So I follow her to kind of say, yeah, you've got it right. The transition of this would then be for me to not actually move round and me to stand still and her to just do it solely on verbal cue. Hazel plays this game absolutely beautifully. She's a real joy to play with. Nice. And you can see here as well, I'm stacking behaviors. So I'm not just doing one behavior reward, one behavior reward. And this is where you can really see the mental and physical enrichment coming out, because she's running around a lot and also really using her brain. And this is kind of a slightly more developed version of the basic game. There are slightly more advanced skills that you can then look at and pulling yourself out of the game and things like that, but that would kind of be another layer to kind of add to it at this point. But this is kind of what you could get to as a really good version of the basic game. And you can just see how much she enjoys it and how much she's just ready for the next ball and ready to work. Once you get them going with it, they just absolutely love it and they really enjoy the work itself. And it's beautiful to kind of see them do it and watch them have an opportunity to do their natural behaviors, and it's a real privilege. So we can start looking at getting them on cue, and like I say, you can start to develop more developed games. Again, this is us playing with Hazel here. I think this was slightly further back in her training, this video. So you'll notice in this video her aways, which she was always sticky on, are not as good as her combis. You can see here her combis are lovely and fluid and she does them really well. However, when you ask for an away, she can get quite sticky or not do the movement as well, and this is really natural. Most dogs are stronger on one side than the other, and that is totally normal. It just means you have to work a little bit harder, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I think you see here with her away. So I cued an away and she did a little bit of a movement, but because we'd been doing a lot of training, because she didn't move, I didn't really give her a lot of, she only did a little bit of a movement. I did kick the ball to stimulate a little bit more movement there. But she did do a tiny movement, but not as much as I would actually ideally have wanted. However, you can see with that combi, she does move really fluidly, really easily, with very little kind of prompting from me at all. Good girl. So again, you can see her sticky there, and I cued it twice. She didn't go to where I wanted her to go, so the ball went out of control. She had to chase it because she wasn't in the right position to stop that movement. And that's where that's where some of this training would look like in a more developed version of the game rather than just the basics, if that makes sense. So, has anybody got any questions around the game? This is kind of the real introduction to urban herding. You've got the catch, teaching them to switch between the different balls, the starting of teaching them that the balance point changes and they have to move to find the balance point, which you then develop into those round flanking movements. You have taking the ball for a walk where you dribble the ball back while keeping on the balance point to create that stalk, that forward movement with that predatory eye behavior. And then you can kind of build it into the whole game of the stop, the left, right, and forward movement. The stops kind of naturally come in. Anytime you kind of stop moving, the dog will generally mimic it, and we just then start to add the cue onto that. But like I showed with those videos, that's kind of with the games that you've given in this is the kind of the more basic version of the game. You can kind of take it where you're pulling yourself out of the game and directing the dog to individual balls and things like that. But in terms of introducing the game, this is where you would start, and that's the kind of stuff that you can get to, which you saw with Hazel there, as a starter. That's where you can start to get to with these games. Has anyone got any questions? You're more than welcome to bob them in the chat box, or switch your mic on and ask if anybody has any.
Could I ask one? I can't even find the hand function on this.
Go mad.
I have adopted a failed international sheepdog thing. He basically was sent to 2 different farmers for training for herding on a sheep farm, and none of them could get him to work. And we've had him for about 8 months now, and he's definitely found his herding instinct now, because we are now his sheep. He's about 2 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So the poor cat is getting herded, so are we. And we're looking to get him in these games, but it looks like he's never been played with, and he gets a ball and he just takes it away. So is there any kind of tips that you would give to begin with in that instance? Because he's obviously had a negative experience of working with these people, that he just takes himself away from the situation.
Yeah.
So just trying to find an outlet to help him.
So I would be very mindful of pressure with this. You moving into his space will put pressure on him. I would always play with multiple balls. So if he does take a ball away, I would then start playing with another ball, bouncing it, rolling it, stuff like that, to see if I can get him to leave the ball he has and come and engage with the ball I have. So kind of a version of this ball, not that ball. But I would try my best not to kind of move into his space and try and take that from him. Because like you said, he's obviously had some form of negative thing happen. We don't want to exacerbate that or add to any of that stress or any of that pressure, because you moving into his space will add pressure onto him. So what we would do is, it may be that you have 2 or 3 balls out, you let him have that one, and then you play with this one. You go, what's this, what's that? And if he re-engages with the game, he then gets the opportunity to play with that ball, and see if we can kind of get like a rotation of balls working, and see if that works a little bit better, if that makes sense. Yeah. Kate? Oh, you're not speaking. You put it into the chat if your thing's not working. Oh, just... Oh. My GSD Juno likes to come in towards the ball and play tight. I'd like to get her further out. So I would look at the cones and having like uprights with her, and see if we can pull the game out that way. You may find with her almost creating more of a square than a circle might work a little bit better, just because traditionally they work a little bit different, and you may find it just is a more natural movement for her. But I would start with having cones, and you can teach them to go around the cone to begin with. If you find she's struggling with it, so start with 1 cone and just like teach to go out and round, and then add in the extra ones if you find that she's constantly cutting across. And then you can start. So I think if you go on our TikTok, I think it's on, we've got videos of us starting with cones like really basically around the person's feet, and slowly building them out until the dog is playing at a really nice distance, because they understand that that's what we're meant to be doing. Does herding things in play activate herding drive, encourage the dog to herd anything else in the environment? No, to an extent, no and yes. So it's like with anything, once you switch, a lot of the times the dog's herding genetics are switched on whether we like it or not. It happens at a very young age because we've obviously selectively bred them to do it. One thing I was mindful of with Piper was when we first started playing the game, she did start to switch on to other balls quite a lot. So like, for example, if we were walking on the moor and there were lads playing football, she would watch the ball and start to stalk it a little bit. However, I was just really obvious and kind of adamant that with my boundary, that my context, that is not the context that we play this game in. And I would recall her away, and when she came with me, I would reward her for that. And I just had to make sure that it's a very contextually played game in terms of how we play it and what we do, if that makes sense. A lot of the time we don't need to encourage herding, it naturally will pop out, if that makes sense. But what we're doing is we're channeling it into a more constructive outlet than what they may potentially find to do with themselves. So like with Piper, she was doing a little bit of car chasing, which was linked to a phantom pregnancy and other things like that, as well as she became a prolific bird chaser, which again was linked with her phantom pregnancy, when it was like the storm in a teacup, hormones and adolescence and genetics all kind of coming together to make my perfect little puppy into some hooligan. But I found with this, it helped me to practice the behaviours that I was struggling with her out in the real life, and put some control on them and teach her to listen to me when she was in those states rather than just zone me out. Yeah, hormonal herding breeds are just, they're a nightmare. So the balls, like I say, you can get the big squishy, the fabric balls, they're from IKEA, or you can just buy them online. You can get them through Amazon. I think the last time I did a workshop, a few of the clients said that Viovet was a cheaper option. They're not, like I said, they're not the cheapest. You're probably looking upwards of 13, 14 to top end 20, depending where you get them from. But I personally like to play with the extra large. I think they're easier for us to handle as humans. But also, if you start to play with the smaller sizes, I can find most of the collies can get their teeth caught in them. So when they're trying to spit them out, they kind of get stuck on their canines. So that extra large size works a little bit better for them. Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, yeah.
Right. I've tried this a little bit with my collie, and he gets really super stuck on one ball. He does this with his toys as well. He'll bring you toys, and then if you throw the wrong one, it can literally land draped over his back, but he won't switch off to the new toy. So I know you gave us some tips in the video, so I'll be trying them. But any other tips? Should I try sort of doing toy swaps and things? Will that help with switching off of things?
Yeah, so there's a game called the Two Toy Swap, which might be something that you could play with him. I'll get the video up. I use it to teach a drop behavior, but it's also quite useful to teach the dogs to switch and swap and exchange between toys, which might be something that you find useful with your dog. Just to teach them that there's different value, and then you could play around with different value of toys as well. So a toy that he prefers to a toy that he prefers slightly less. I'll just get it up now. So the next game we're going to play is the two toy game. You want two toys that are very similar to each other. So I have two rabbit skin tuggies. You want to make sure that they're similar toys so that your dog doesn't have a preference over one over the other. So two toys that are the same or very, very similar are kind of what we're looking for. What we're going to start with is playing with one toy. So we're going to release our dog to get it. We don't want them just jumping at toys in our hands. So they can only take the toy when we give them the release cue to get it. And we're going to give them a bit of a game of tug, 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 and when we're ready, we're just going to bring that toy into our leg and make it go quite dead. As we do, we're going to produce the other toy and say, get it. And what we're teaching them is to spit one toy out in anticipation for the other. So we're not starting to drop means bad stuff, so things are getting taken away. It means, oh, I better spit that out for something good else happening. So I want to start with my young dog, releasing them pretty quickly. Yeah, good boy. Nice game of tuggy. Good boy, good boy. And when I'm ready, I will just bring the toy into my leg, good, and release the other toy for him to take. And what I want is him starting to learn to spit it out in anticipation. So at this point, I'll produce the other toy quite quickly. So again, up to my leg and dead,
Yeah, good boy. Good boy. But eventually, I want him to be able to have that differentiation of adding the cue in. Drop. Good, get it. Nice. Good. So start adding my release cue, which for me is drop. Good boy. Get it. Get it, get it. Good boy. Drop. Get it. Nice.
So you could play like a version of this game where it's one toy, swap it out for another toy quite quickly and see if you can get him switching like that. If you were really struggling with it, you could play a version of this game with just the one ball and just kick it to him, get him to drop it and have another go. If you were trying to like focus on the specific skills, but I may do games like that on the side as well, just to see if you can create more of a dog that is willing to kind of switch and exchange between the different toys.
Thanks. Yeah, he's got a pretty good drop command. So should I maybe use that as a, because he's not holding it, so it wouldn't kind of be a drop, but
So what I would do is if you've got
and
two
he's got a
toys
good
that are the
lead it
same,
actually.
have two toys that are the same and see if you can swap from one to the other. So play, 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 drop, get this one instead. Play, 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 drop, get this one instead. We'd then see if we can do swap them so that similar but slightly different. Play with this, swap onto something different. Play with this, swap onto something different, and see if you can get that as so he learns to play with the toy that is active, moving in your hand, rather than the one he perceives to be the one he wants. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And if I do that alongside the things that I've seen in
Yeah.
the videos with the herding, then hopefully we'll get him a little bit less stuck.
Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions? Can you put the stare on cue? You could if you wanted to. You have some people who you may use it as like a look forward command. So some collies can really struggle, especially if you were doing a little bit more of like the predatory play stuff, where especially if you've done a lot of work of engagement where you've taught the dog to check in a lot and look at you, they can sometimes struggle with like, but that's not what I'm meant to be doing. You've spent a lot of time teaching me to look at you. Looking at the toy is not what you want. So you could put that as a look forward or focus on, or whatever you wanted to use as the cue. You could teach them to as that as a cue, so that the dog doesn't stare at the other dogs and set off the reactive ones. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear okay here, but I was just saying, so my dog is a starer, so obviously she's very much a happening dog, so she has quite an intense stare, even if she's not particularly bothered by something. She's just very curious. She's very optimistic, but she's very interested in pretty much everything. She's got a very inquisitive brain. She's a young dog. She likes to see how things smell, what they look like, what they do. She's quite nosy, naturally, inquisitive.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, if we're walking through town and there's reactive dogs, which there seems to be a lot of at the moment, I'm guessing probably because of the lockdown with the puppies not being socialized and so on. But if she stares at another animal quite intently, it can set them off. They start lunging and growling and barking at her. And I've been told that it's not very polite behavior.
No, it's not. Collies can have a habit of eyeballing other dogs, and they may not necessarily mean it in a threatening way, but it is because they are quite intense dogs anyway. It can be quite unnerving for other dogs. So when you mean the stare on a cue, do you mean to check in with you?
Yeah, so having a way of breaking it.
So what
I have a look at me cue, but if I don't notice it, sometimes they're already reacting by the time I've noticed. Will she be able
to break the eye contact if they're reacting?
Yeah, she's not that bothered by reactive dogs.
Fab. I don't quite understand your question, because if you've already got, so I suppose what you'd be looking for is teaching her to look away.
Yeah. Well, she's got to look at me, but I thought, is there a way of putting it on cue so that she's not doing it unless I actually ask her to do it, rather than having to?
No, not really.
Okay.
Because in that context, there's elements of social and other things coming in. It's kind of like saying, don't look at that to a toddler. That's what they're going to look at, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't quite work like that.
Okay, well, thank you though.
No, it's fine.
I've got one last question. But also that person, Ray, I had a colleague that did that too. To just like got off on rising other dogs. But I used to use the watch me cue when I'd clock her doing it. And then that would calm the other dog down because she was just a devil for doing things like that. Because she just used to get a kick out of it. If you've got a dog that would like, say, this rescue adopted dog that I have, if he won't engage in this as a mechanism for getting his herding an outlet, is there anything else you think that might help him?
So there's also a version of this which we do called predatory play, which is an opportunity to do these behaviors, but on like flirt poles and tuggies and things like that, which can work really well as well. And these can be really useful, especially if you have a dog that really enjoys chase behavior a little bit more. They're slightly different, but it's still getting the dog to exhibit the same behaviors, but in just a really slightly different fashion.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, that's great. Thank you.
You can sometimes find as well, if they struggle with the big balls, if you've done a lot of tennis ball stuff with them, starting this game, teaching them on tennis balls can work really well as well.
He's got an odd fear of the sound of the thud of a ball. The only thing I think that might resemble is something being kicked.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've worked with so many dogs that have the weirdest triggers. One of mine doesn't like, you know, if people pop chewing gum, hates it, hides from it. Fine with fireworks, but if you're chewing gum and you clack it, you pop it, she'll hide. Yeah, weirdest triggers. Has anyone else got any questions or anything? No? Fab. Well, you'll get a recording of this. Hopefully it'll get sent out tomorrow as long as I can get my YouTube to play ball and upload it effectively, because we've had a couple of issues with that in the past. But you should get it tomorrow at the latest Saturday, as long as YouTube is playing ball. You should get a link to our training group if you want to post any videos of your training with your dog in that group. We can give you some feedback and stuff like that as well. I hope you've enjoyed it and you've got some ideas. If any of you have any questions, if you're watching this on record or on replay or however, if you drop us an email or bob it into the Facebook group, we can answer your questions there. I hope this is okay for everybody, and it was lovely to meet you guys.
Thank you so much.
See you
Thank
later.
you. Bye.
Bye.